And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and this is Brewing with Underwhelming Commanders. That's right. I brought it back just briefly, just for the one episode, actually, so don't get too excited, all of you people that were asking about it. I thought, you know what? I have brought back my 10-card series. A lot of people are excited about that. And for those who don't know, I used to do another series on my channel called Brewing with Underwhelming Commanders, which I did for a couple of years. I haven't done it for about a year, and I decided to give it one more shot, give it another revisit. Just the one episode though. How it used to work is I would do a poll and people would vote on the commanders they wanted me to build decks around. I usually would do 3 per episode. So that is what I will be doing here. I will be building around 3 underwhelming commanders, what I consider to be underwhelming commanders, obviously. These certainly are unpopular commanders, without a doubt. And in fact, I'm going to start off with one I actually did do in my Underwhelming Commanders series. One of the first Underwhelming Commanders videos I ever did. Triad of Fates ended up winning that poll, and I am revisiting it here because I think I just have a way more interesting idea for this commander. I actually wasn't very happy with the deck that I had built there. I was trying to figure out, okay, what can I do here? Obviously, you can do a little bit of a blinking theme. You can hit your opponent's creatures, but it is a really tough commander to build around. So 2 white and a black human wizard 3/3, pay 1 and tap, put a fate counter on another target creature. You can pay a white and tap, exile target creature that has a fate counter on it, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control, so you can blink a creature. Obviously, you want to be doing that on your creatures, right? You can pay a black and tap it, exile target creature that has a fate counter on it. Its controller draws 2 cards. So obviously, you want to be doing that on your opponent's creatures because, of course, they don't come back. You can do that on your creatures as well, though, because, of course, you get the card draw. The only card that I really could find that actually worked great with Triad of Fates is Oblivion Stone, which it can put fate counters on creatures as well, and also destroys each non-land permanent without a fate counter on it. So you can use your commander to put fate counters on your stuff as well. It works with the Oblivion Stone. But other than that, there's not a lot of great ways to use this commander. Untapping it, sure, stuff like that. However, because I have changed my deck building style to more of a method 2 deck building style, which means I'm not building around the commander as much. I'm mostly building a theme and then finding a commander that fits. I actually had built this deck pretty much in its entirety first before I stumbled across, hey, Triad of Fates actually works as a great commander here. Oblivion Stone, funny enough, is the only card I think that I switched once I chose Triad of Fates as the commander. What's the theme of the deck? Well, the theme of the deck is a really interesting theme that I've been wanting to do for a while, which is a forced draw sort of huggy theme. I think that's fantastic in white and black colors because, of course, white does the group huggy, secret rendezvous. You can draw cards, but also I get to draw cards. Lorn of the Third Path. We can both draw a card, right? So it's letting your opponents draw cards. Not so much letting, it's actually forcing your opponents to draw cards, which is really, really important. Oblation, funny old card that I just mentioned in my Cards You Don't See Anymore video, which used to be a really popular removal option in the format. Going to be a great fit here because, of course, we can remove our opponent's permanent and also force them to draw 2 cards, which is what we want. We want our opponents to be drawing cards. And of course, what black does really well is punish our opponents for doing so. Underworld Dreams being the best example of this. Obviously, whenever an opponent draws a card, Underworld Dreams deals 1 damage to them. Of course, there are lots of effects like that, Fate Unraveler as well, but there is also the punishing your opponents for having cards in their hand, like Price of Knowledge, which is obviously a slam dunk here. We also have all those artifacts that are doing it, like Miser's Cage, like Viceling, right? All those artifacts that punish our opponents for having cards in hand. This is essentially an Owling Mine deck. If anyone remembers that deck from Standard back in the day with Ebony Owl Netsuke and Howling Mine, both of which, of course, are in the deck. That's the idea. You're having your opponents draw more cards, and then you're punishing them either for drawing cards or for having more cards in hand. And of course, there are other really neat ways that you can put cards into your opponent's hands, like with Spurn Mage Advocate or Pulse Mage Advocate. These will return cards from your opponent's graveyard to their hand. So Pulse Mage Advocate says, tap, return 3 cards from an opponent's graveyard to their hand, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So this guy is a way to repeatedly recur creatures out of our graveyard. That's pretty good, but it is also putting 3 cards into our opponent's hand. Now it's not draw, it doesn't work with the Underworld Dreams, but it works great with the Ebony Owl Netsuke or any card that wants our opponents to have lots of cards in hand. So it actually fits really nicely in this theme. It is really easy to attack our opponent's life total with all of these kinds of effects, and you even have Peer into the Abyss and Eldritch Pact, which we can use on ourselves because it says target player draws cards, but obviously we can use on our opponents as well, depending on what we have in play. And these are typically going to be one-shot kills in this deck. Now, getting back to our commander, why does this fit? Well, of course, because that last ability is forcing our opponents to draw cards. We're now using that as an advantage for us. Yes, we can exile our opponent's creatures, that's great, but they're also going to draw 2 cards. So this is very much a method 2 deck where our commander is an assist in what it's doing, right? We can very much play this deck and never cast the commander. You definitely could do that, but our commander is a really nice assist here, right? Commanders like this, like Triad of Fates, those really underwhelming commanders that there isn't a ton to build around, I think fit better in the method 2 strategy where I can play my commander, start putting fate counters on stuff, exile troublesome creatures, and also have my opponents be drawing cards, which is an advantage to me. I really like this build for Triad of Fates. Let's move on to Meneldor, Swift Savior, certainly an underwhelming commander without a doubt. 3 and a blue bird soldier, 3/3 with flying. When Meneldor, Swift Savior deals combat damage to a player, exile up to 1 target creature you own, then return it to the battlefield under your control. So as I talked about in a 5 builds video before, I believe, of course, one of the reasons why this is such an underwhelming commander is because it's kind of doing the blinking thing, and there's just so many way better blinking commanders, Brago being the best example, which is doing something very similar, and also it's in white, and you really kind of want white in a blinking theme. White and blue are the best colors for that. Here you only get blue, you only get 1 trigger per turn. Oh, Brago's so much better, isn't it? But of course, the reason why Meneldor can be way better is because of the wording on the card. Exile up to 1 target creature you own, then return it to the battlefield under your control. And the idea I gave in that 5 builds video, which I went ahead and built myself, is the exchanging creatures theme, right? So Gilded Drake, which unfortunately is an expensive card, but works perfectly in this theme because it comes down, I exchange it with my opponent's best creature, then I attack with my commander, and of course, my Gilded Drake is in play under someone else's control. I connect with whoever, and I'm not going to be attacking the person with the Gilded Drake because of course they can block with it. I'll attack someone else, and then I'm going to exile a creature I own. Well, I own that Gilded Drake even though it's under my opponent's control, and it's going to come back into play under my control. And when it does, well, what does it say? When it enters the battlefield, exchange control of Gilded Drake and up to 1 target creature an opponent controls. So now I get to steal something else. And then I can do it the next turn and the next turn and so on and so forth. So that is what this deck is doing, and it does it really, really well. I am using exchange cards like Daring Thief, where I'm going to swap creatures with somebody else, and then I'm going to immediately get it back. And funny enough, the ETB theme actually does work really good here. If I have a Spellseeker, my Spellseeker comes down, I go tutor for some card out of my library, an instant or sorcery card with mana value 2 or less, I put it in my hand. Then I exchange my Spellseeker because it's just sitting there doing nothing. I exchange it with something my opponents have. I use my Puka's Mischief, for example, right? 3 and a blue enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may exchange control of target non-land permanent you control and target non-land permanent and opponent controls with an equal or lesser mana value. So I swap my Spellseeker with whatever my opponent has with lesser or equal mana value that I want, and then I attack with my Meneldor, steal my Spellseeker back, but I'm not just stealing it back. I'm not using a homeward path here. I'm actually blinking it because it is getting exiled and coming back into play under my control. So I will again get that Spellseeker trigger. It actually does work with the blinking theme. Pilgrim's Eye comes in, I go get a land with it. I already want to be doing that in my deck, right? I already need to go get lands. Then I swap it. You guys can have my Pilgrim's Eye. It's useless for me. It's not doing anything. Then I attack with my commander, steal my Pilgrim's Eye back, but I'm also getting the ETB again. So I go get another land out of my deck. That is what this deck is doing. It works really, really good. I was seriously considering putting this deck together for myself. The exchange theme, I will warn you, the theme this deck is doing doesn't work great over webcam, which of course is what I do for the most part with a lot of the games I play with my patrons over the Discord. And so that theme can be really tough to do via webcam with people that aren't in the same same room with you, obviously. I will warn you, if you plan on putting this deck together, it is a really great deck. If you plan on doing so, just be warned, it's better to play in person. This, I will also point out, is very much a method 1 deck, meaning you do actually want your commander in play. You're relying on it a lot. Some people prefer that. Some people really like a deck where you're actually needing your commander in play and you want to use it. So take note of that as well. The last deck I will be talking about here, I'm going back to the method 2 here, and I'm going to another commander that I've talked about on my channel so much, but I'm finally actually building a deck around it. Shaile, Dean of Radiance, and or the backside, Embrose, Dean of Shadow, which is likely the side you're going to be building around. I thought this was the better build around as a commander. I don't love Shaile as a build around of a commander. Embrose is much better as a build around, but of course, we're doing method 2 here, which means it's not necessarily built around our commander. It's just a commander that fits the theme of what we're doing. This is another white-black deck that is doing a specific theme that I picked Embrose and Shaile after the fact. And funny enough, the way this deck works, you can play either side depending on what point you are at in the game. I can play the Embrose side or I can play the Shaile side. This, I don't think is that underwhelming a commander, but it is certainly a unpopular one. People don't like this guy. I don't know why. I never have. I think the Embrose side in particular is really, really good. 2 black, human warlock, 4/4. Tap, put a +1/+1 counter on another target creature. Then Embrose, Dean of Shadow deals 2 damage to that creature. And again, I love abilities that I can use it on my opponents or I can use it on myself. You can actually use this to kill your opponent's creature if it only has a 1 toughness, or you can use it on your own creatures to either buff your creatures or to draw cards, because whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it dies, draw a card. I think this is a great commander, but as I said, we might also be using the front side, the Shaile, Dean of Radiance side, 1 and a white bird cleric, 1/1 flying vigilance. Tap, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature that entered the battlefield under your control this turn. And funny enough, you'll look at the commanders, both the front and the back, and you'll say to yourself, okay, well, we want to be doing a counters theme, right? We want to bring counters on our creature. It actually is the opposite of that. Funny enough, the idea I originally had for this deck, again, before I even chose the commander, was a removing counters theme. That's the theme of the deck. It is a strategy I have visited before, but I decided to visit it again because I think it is a really interesting strategy. And there is a lot more support in this theme than from the last time I did it. So very simply, I am putting cards in this deck like Pharopede or Feign the Broker that are removing counters from stuff, right? Feign the Broker says, tap, remove a counter from a creature you control, create a treasure token. So obviously, with our commander, maybe we use it to put a counter on a creature, then we can remove that counter to make a treasure token. So not super great, but it does work with what we're doing. Obviously, also Feign the Broker can sacrifice a creature to put 2/+1 counters on target creature. So it's working in a lot of different ways. Obviously, this is going to do a whole lot in the deck. Pharopede, it's just an unblockable artifact creature that when it deals combat damage to a player, you remove a counter from target permanent. Okay, well, how's that working in the deck? Well, it works because we're removing counters from permanents. For example, Eye of Doom, which is a card that, funny enough, was printed in a commander set and hardly ever sees play. It is a very political card, but I guess with all the removal we have in the format now, there's so many better options, but it works really great here. 4 mana artifact. When it enters the battlefield, each player chooses a non-land permanent and puts a Doom counter on it. So each player gets to put a Doom counter on a permanent. It's that political sort of removal effect. You pay 2, tap it, sacrifice it to destroy each permanent with a Doom counter on it. So you can possibly get a whole bunch of permanents off the battlefield with this. But as a lot of people point out, well, your opponents are probably just going to pick something of yours and put a counter on it. Then you're not going to want to use this because you're not going to want to use that thing. That's okay. I'll just attack with my Pharopede, and when I connect with it, I will remove the Doom counter from whatever permanent I have so that I can then use my Eye of Doom, right? That's the idea of the deck. I have a whole bunch of effects in here like Vampire Hexmage or Thrall Parasite that want to be removing counters from stuff, and I have a whole bunch of stuff that want counters removed from them, like Voracious Hatchling, 3 and a hybrid Orzhov mana, so a 4 mana elemental 6/6 with lifelink. That's a pretty cheap 6/6 lifelink creature. Even in today's meta with all the power creep, that's still pretty good. However, it enters the battlefield with 4 -1/-1 counters on it. Whenever you cast a white spell, remove a -1/-1 counter. Whenever you cast a black spell, remove a -1/-1 counter. So we can remove the counters by casting white and black spells, but of course we have a whole bunch of other ways, like our Vampire Hexmage, that we can just remove all the counters all at once if we want to. Aether Snap is obviously the best way to just remove all counters and also exile all tokens at once. This is probably the best card card in their deck, right? Any effect that is going to remove all counters is going to work really, really great here. Woolly Razorback, funny old card, is one of those cards that wants counters to be removed from itself. 2 white, 7/7 beast. Again, even by today's standards with all the power creep, still a pretty good rate. It enters the battlefield with 3 ice counters on it. As long as it has an ice counter on it, it has Defender, and any combat damage that would be dealt to it is prevented. Whenever it blocks, you remove an ice counter from it. But of course, we got a whole bunch of other ways to remove counters from it. We can very easily just remove all the counters from this immediately, and then we have a 7/7 creature for 4 mana. Not too shabby. Sagas obviously work fantastically here as well. That's something I have done on my channel before. And if you are in any Saga tribal deck, I recommend putting any of these remove counter effects, depending on the colors you're in, because of course they put lore counters on themselves, and you can get back to any chapter, right? Any chapter you want to get back to, you can remove the counters so that you can use that chapter again, like Phyrexian Scriptures. 2 black, Enchantment Saga, chapter 1, put a +1 counter on up to 1 target creature. That creature becomes an artifact in addition to its other types. Chapter 2, destroy all non-artifact creatures. So if we want, we can continually keep removing that chapter so that over and over again, we get the board wipe non-stop. Say we got our Ferropede in play, that's an artifact creature that is not going to get destroyed by the Phyrexian Scriptures, and we can just repeatedly keep removing the counter from it to board wipe over and over again. That's the kind of shenanigans we can get into with this deck. Battle at Hoover Dam, which came out in Fallout, is an absolute slam dunk in this theme. 3 and a white enchantment. As it enters the battlefield, choose NCR or Legion. The Legion says, whenever a creature you control dies, put 2 +1 counters on target creature you control, which kind of does fit the theme of what we're doing, but more so, the NCR says at the beginning of your end step, return target creature with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it, which of course means if it would die, it gets exiled, but we can remove the finality counter. So that creature comes back into play. We remove the finality counter from it with one of our effects, and then it just stays in play. And if it dies, goes back to the graveyard and we can get it back again. Halls of Mist is a funny one. Cumulative upkeep will work here, right? Because of course, cumulative upkeep is using age counters, and Halls of Mist is a land with cumulative upkeep 1. So if we constantly keep removing the age counters from it, we'll likely never have to pay more than 1 for the upkeep here. Creatures that attack during their controller's last turn can't attack. So this is a neat little fog effect on a land. And of course, the other land that we obviously have in this theme, which is kind of a win con, is Dark Depths, the most infamous remove counters effect, because of course it enters the battlefield with 10 ice counters on it, and when it has no ice counters on it, sacrifice it. If you do, create Merit Lage, a legendary 2020 black avatar creature token with flying and indestructible. So that would be, I guess, one of the win cons in this deck. Another really funny win con in the deck is Celestial Convergence. 2 white enchantment. Enters the battlefield with 7 omen counters on it. At the beginning of your upkeep, remove an omen counter from Celestial Convergence. If there are no omen counters on Celestial Convergence, the player with the highest life total wins the game. If 2 or more players are tied for the highest, the game is a draw. So you can get a draw here if you want. Some people actually like to do that. Because we can manipulate counters and control the amount of counters that are on this, it's very easy for us to, at the right moment when we have the most life, remove all the counters so that we get the win. There's a lot of really neat effects here that we can manipulate the counters on. And I know people say, okay, well, why Shaile and Embrose as the commander? They're putting counters on stuff. There are stuff that we want counters on so that we can remove counters, right? Again, that works with the Fane, that works with a lot of stuff. Retribution of the Ancients is a great card that works here that way, where we can pay 1 black and remove X +1/+1 counters from among creatures you control, and target creature gets -X in the end of turn. So the creatures that we want to remove counters from, we can use this, or we can use our Shaile or Embrose to put counters on stuff so that we can then remove them. Hope Initiate is another one that actually happens to work here, where we can remove 2 +1/+1 counters from this to destroy an artifact or an enchantment. So of course we can put counters on it with our commanders to then remove those counters to destroy stuff, or we can have this thing put counters on itself with the training ability to remove the counters with Retribution of the Ancients, or remove the counters with Fane to make a treasure token. You know, again, it is a little bit convoluted here, yes, I suppose, but there's a lot of neat interactions that way. That's why Shaile and Embrose actually kind of do work as the commander. Again, though, this is very much a method 2 deck where you don't need to probably ever cast your commander. You certainly could get away with it. I put some really interesting, unique cards in here that might not be the best ever, but they do work in the deck. You could probably swap out some of the ones that maybe you don't like for ones that you think maybe work better, but it is a really neat deck, and it's using a commander that I think is very underrated in the format as well. So So there it is. And of course, all three that I talked about in this video are in the description below if you're interested with any of them. I love building with underwhelming commanders. And again, the method 2 for me is actually a better way to do that, right? Any of those underwhelming commanders that there's not a lot to build around there. Okay, well, how about we find a theme that we can build around and then find an underwhelming commander that happens to fit the theme of what we are already doing. I like that way a lot. Feel free to give any of these guys a run for yourself. That is it for today, though, and thanks for tuning in.